And other colleagues from the standing group. It is a pleasure to present a paper and a paper that has been that I co-authored with Luc van der Baren and David Rijgel, and that draws on data from the Global Citizenship Observatory. Global Cit is a platform and online research network of citizenship expertise, where we cover questions of the acquisition and loss of citizenship, and also associated electoral rights of citizens and non-citizens. So it is really a pleasure to introduce a paper that has just been published in the International Migration Review. And the paper is titled "The Global Panel Dataset of Dyadic Dual Citizenship Acceptance." And I will explain what all of these terms mean. Daniela, you will stop me if I talk too long. The paper is online. If you don't have access to the paper, don't hesitate to email me, and I'm happy to send you a copy of the paper. There is also a ungated preprint version already available online, and all the data that we present in the paper are available freely in open access mode, and I will tell you all about the data. Well, let me. So we presented in this paper the data set, what is behind it, why did we collect the data, how did we collect it, and what can you do with it, right? So yeah, this is a published paper, but certainly not the end of the story, and we are very happy for people to make use of our data, to replicate what we do, to link our data to other related questions. And yeah, we would look forward to seeing all the work that hopefully people will be doing with our data. So first thing, maybe a clarification, right? So in the paper, we talk about dual citizenship. So what is dual citizenship? So first we need to clarify what citizenship is. And in Global Cit, the Global Citizenship Observatory, we define citizenship as the legal status expressing a relation between an individual and a state. And so that's important to keep in mind, that we understand, we take a formal definition of citizenship as a legal status, right? There are, of course, other definitions possible of citizenship, other understandings of citizenship, which might relate to the idea of citizenship as belonging or of participation, but in Global Cit we take a more narrow perspective on citizenship as a legal status. Of course, we take into account these more broader understandings to the extent that these often influence the regulation of the legal status, right? So we see that states around the world they often change the regulations on how you can become a citizen and also how you can lose citizenship, and those political decisions are often reflected by changing conceptions of citizenship, right? So if we view belonging in a more narrow sense as people who have maybe an ethno-cultural relation with existing citizens, but people with a different background should not become citizens, then of course this may be reflected in the regulation of citizenship, right? So different political conceptions influence the legal relation of citizenship. And citizenship, of course, is a status that gives rise to certain rights, right? If there would be no exclusive rights attached to it, it would be an empty status, but we see that it differentiates in terms of the rights that people might hold, right? And that's why citizenship is important. In the current world, of course, citizenship is very much a status, also a mobility status, so it gives you access to the territory, right? So as citizen, you have unrestricted access to the state of which you are a citizen, right? So and that's probably one of the most important rights that is attached to it. I listed here also access to the franchise, right? And especially at a national level, we see that voting rights and the right to be elected are still mostly restricted to citizens only, right? At a local level, we see that citizenship and voting rights increasingly become decoupled. So as a long-term resident in a country, you might have already access voting rights at the local level. And in the European Union, any European Union citizen residing in the member state in another member state has access to local voting rights. As I mentioned, it is also an area that we are collecting data on within the Global Citizenship Observatory, and we plan to publish a new data set later this year on migrant electoral rights, which will cover the rights of non-resident citizens, so people who live outside of the country of their citizenship, and also non-citizen residents, right? So immigrants, for example. Now, what we see around the world with regard to the acquisition and loss of legal status is that the regulation varies greatly. And so this is because this indicates, of course, that citizenship is also a meaningful status, right? If it would be meaningless, people would not change the rules. They would not have different conceptions about this. But we see that it is often a highly politicized question. And nowadays, you may have seen that in the United States, there's a lot of discussion about so-called birthright citizenship, right? So this is the regulations in the United States that give rights to citizenship for anyone born on US territory. And this is currently being contested as a result of an executive order of President Trump. But that is in apparent violation of the existing constitutional rights that people hold, right? So that is an example of the highly politicized nature of citizenship, and that's also why it is interesting to study, right? So it is a meaningful status for people, and it often leads to controversy about rules. Should we make the rules more restrictive or more inclusive? Now, when we talk about dual citizenship, we actually we refer to the legal relation that people may hold with two states, right? So you can imagine, I already mentioned birthright. So if there is a European citizen who moves to the United States and they have a child in the United States, then we see that that child will be automatically US citizen, but they often also acquire the citizenship of the parents by descent of the parents. So that is, of course, one way that you can become a dual citizen. In this paper, we mainly look at the rules that apply to first-generation migrants, so people who move to another country, live there, and want to acquire the citizenship of that state. And then the question is, can they, when they acquire the citizenship of the state where they live, can they hold on to the state where they came from, right? So this is a dual citizenship. We talk in the paper about dual citizenship, but in principle, this could also be multiple citizenship, right? So people sometimes may have three citizenships, right? If they get one citizenship from one parent, another citizenship from the other parent, and maybe the citizenship because they are born in the third country. Right? So actually, it's a bit more complicated. In this paper, we reduce some of that complexity by talking specifically about dual citizenship. Now, the overall trend of dual citizenship is quite well studied. We see that this was traditionally very controversial, right? Especially when you think of the first half of the 20th century, most states around the world had restrictive rules, and that meant that if a citizen of a state acquired the citizenship of another state, they would automatically lose the citizenship of the origin state, right? So state had restrictive rules in order to prevent the existence of dual citizenship as a phenomenon, which was considered to be problematic. For example, since, of course, citizenship is not only about rights, but also about obligations. And one of the traditional duties related to citizenship was a military service. If you are a citizen of two countries, what would happen if these two countries enter into armed conflict, right? How can you fight for one country against another country of which you are also a citizen? So this would people often for a long time thought would lead to conflicts of loyalty. Now, with the diminishing prevalence of interstate conflict, that concern has become much less important. Of course, there is still armed conflict in the world, and there are also still conflicts between states, as we unfortunately still see. today in Europe and elsewhere. But these between-state conflicts are less prevalent. And what we also see in citizenship law is that gender equality became increasingly more important in citizenship law. Traditionally, dual citizenship was also restricted by having gender discriminatory provisions. If a woman would acquire the citizenship, would marry a foreign man, she would often automatically acquire the citizenship of her husband and automatically lose the citizenship of her origin country. And so this was a clear form of gender discrimination, and through which dual citizenship was also avoided. Now that gender discrimination is increasingly seen as problematic, and we see that this increasingly, but not completely, diminishes around the world, dual citizenship as a demographic phenomenon, because people may be of mixed state origin and have children, then the children will have the citizenship of both the parents. Dual citizenship comes increasingly into existence, and states find it increasingly less meaningful to have rules in place that aim to avoid dual citizenship. We also see that migrants who live outside of their country of origin often lobby their origin countries because they have still a continued relation with the country of which they come from. For example, through economic links, through remittances, and they often lobby the governments of their origin countries to liberalize dual citizenship rules, because they say, well, we still have a strong link with the country. We identify as citizens of countries where we came from. We have economic ties. So we also want to be recognized as citizens, even though we might also have acquired links with other countries. In Europe, we see a strong liberalization trend. I listed here a couple of examples. Sweden in 2001, Finland followed, then Sweden in 2003, Denmark in 2015, Norway in 2020, and most recently, Germany in 2024 liberalized its citizenship law, or as it was called in Germany, modernized its citizenship law to accept dual citizenship after long discussions. Okay. A few words about the state of the art. So dual citizenship is something that is certainly already studied for a long time in the literature. So there is a lot of literature on this, both more normative literature. Should we accept dual citizenship? Legal literature, how is this regulated between countries? And also about the politics, looking into specific diaspora communities or specific immigrant communities. But what we noticed with my co-authors, Luke and David, is that the way in which dual citizenship is studied tends to be monadic, right? So that means that we tend to look at dual citizenship in the literature, especially from the perspective of one country only. So we have quite a lot of colleagues who study dual citizenship as part of an immigrant integration research agenda. So they look at the lobby activities of migrant communities to the governments of the countries where they reside, and political parties taking up that cause. At the same time, we also see transnationalist studies, more diaspora studies that look at the activities of specific diaspora communities that look specifically at dual citizenship from an origin country perspective. So this is, of course, extremely valuable literature, but this it takes a restrictive perspective, because dual citizenship, as it already says in the term, is a dyadic phenomenon. That means that it is a phenomenon that exists between two states, and you cannot only look at origin or at destination. And so this is why we decided to construct this data set in order to measure the regulation of citizenship between states over time. And this, of course, is important if we want to understand outcomes, for example, relating to migration, or relating to naturalization behavior, or relating to specific electoral dynamics. So the contribution that we make in the paper is first of all, a data contribution. We constructed a data set which consists of 1.8 million origin, country, year combinations over this between 201 countries that we consider both origin and destination. So each country is considered both an origin and a destination. We look at that over this period of 63 years. And we also include rules that we observe with regard to what we call Dyadic-specific regulations. So the best example to think of this is before 2024, before Germany liberalized its citizenship law, dual citizenship was restricted, but there was an exception in German citizenship law which said that if a German citizen acquires the citizenship of another EU member state, he or she does not lose the citizenship of Germany. And when a citizen of another EU member state naturalizes in Germany, we don't force them to give up their other citizenship. And so that is a Dyadic-specific regulation because it applies between Germany and the Netherlands, between Germany and Belgium, between Germany and Spain, and so on. We provide in the paper also a description of the trend that we then see on the basis of the data. We reflect on the relevance for global migrant populations. We connect this to with data from the Varieties of Democracy project, where we look at political regime constellations, and we have an application where we look at naturalization rates. I already mentioned that this is the data that comes from the origin of our data set is a global SID. Without global SID, we would not have been able to construct our data. And I do invite you to go to our website, globalsid.eu, where you can find anything that you want to know, I think, about the regulation of citizenship. Okay, so how did we measure this? We use as the starting point the global citizenship law dataset, which you can find online. That's a monadic dataset which captures the regulations in place with regard to acquisition and loss in 191 countries, and we supplemented this with some smaller microstates that were not yet available in the V2 dataset. This leads to 201 countries. Which we cover from 1960 to 2022. We cover two types of regulation. So this is important for the dyadic. The idea of dyadic dual citizenship acceptance is that a migrant who wants to naturalize faces two kinds of potential restrictions with regard to dual citizenship. So one is with regard to the origin country. Right? So when you naturalize abroad, it might the citizenship law of your own country where you came from may have a restriction, and this is typically a restriction that means the loss of citizenship. This can be either automatic or it can be by a more discretionary withdrawal procedure. So the government is allowed to take back your citizenship. But you also face a destination country restriction. So if you are a migrant from Austria living in Germany, you might say, well, this is very good. Germany naturalized or liberalized its citizenship law, so finally I can keep dual citizenship. Well, that's not the case because Austria still restricts dual citizenship for its citizens who naturalize abroad. So in order to have dual citizenship, both the origin country and the destination country need to have liberal rules. If one of these two states does not have a liberal conception, then by definition you cannot have dual citizenship. So then we consider each country in our data set both a destination and an origin country because we have data on acquisition rules and loss rules in our data set. And then we combine all those countries. So this is 201 countries times 200, and then we multiply that with a number of years in which these countries exist, and that leads to about 1.8 million combinations. They are directed, what is called in the literature, directed dyads, because the rules are specific for a person coming from one country and going to another country, right? So these 1.8 observations or entries, rows in the Excel file that you can download. They are directed Dyad year observations for each potential person from one country to a country. And as I already mentioned, we also include then dyadic corrections, because in the main data set is based on the general rule, which applies to everyone, but in some cases there may be bilateral treaties between countries, or countries such as Germany, as I already explained, may have unilateral exceptions for naturalizations of its citizens in other countries or for citizens of particular countries. Most recently, for example, I understood that the Czech Republic is considering restricting its citizenship law in order to force citizens of Russia to give up Russian citizenship, in addition to actually making it more restrictive or even impossible for citizens of Russia to naturalize in Germany, right? So whether that is in line with international law is still to be seen, but this is an example of countries that make specific exceptions. Typically, these exceptions that we cover in these dyadic corrections will be liberal exceptions, right? So people who can have dual citizenship, even though the general rule is restrictive. So as you will see in the paper, we have a number of variables in our data set that allows you to do different things and depends on what you're interested in. So if you're interested only in monadic perspective, so if you're interested only in destination country rules or only in origin country rules, then the monadic data will be already sufficient for you. And then you can use some of these monadic variables that are in the data, which either refer to loss, so this would be LDC, right, which are the origin country rules, or which refer to acquisition, which will be the destination country dual citizenship restrictions. And we also have a variable that I will show you in a moment that combines this, right? So we can show for all the countries in our data set what are their dual citizenship rules for immigrants and for citizens who naturalize abroad. And we have then also the dyadic variables, and we have also the dyadic variables without the correction, the dyadic correction, and with dyadic correction. So this would be with the C added to the variable name. And we also have a measure that looks at whether the dual citizenship restriction is consistent, whether the restrictions are consistent or not. And we explain this further in the paper, but this basically refers to whether the loss of citizenship for origin country rules is automatic or not. I already explained that most countries traditionally, if a citizen would automatically acquire citizenship of another country, you automatically lose the citizenship of your country. That is the case, for example, still in Austria or in the Netherlands. But there are also countries such as Ukraine, where there is not an automatic loss, but a withdrawal procedure. That means that the Ukraine government can take back the citizenship, the Ukrainian citizenship of a person that acquires the citizenship of another country. We call this less consistent restriction because it's not automatic but discretionary, which means that the restriction may be applied in some cases, but may also not be applied. Right? So that's why this is not consistent. Okay, well, we first look at the monadic trend, so the rules in place in individual countries. And when we look at these countries that we cover in our data set from 1960 to 2022, we see that when we go back 60 years in time, most of the countries in the world still restricted dual citizenship or restricted it only for certain categories. So you see in North America that immigrants were still forced to give up their citizens naturalizing abroad would still lose citizenship, and in other countries maybe only immigrants would be expected to renounce their citizenship. But when we go from 1960 to 1980 to 2000 to 2022, you see that the world becomes increasingly more green, and that means that countries become increasingly more liberal. Then we go to the dyadic part, where we combine these rules on origin country restrictions, so the loss provisions, and the destination country provisions, so the requirement to renounce your previous citizenship as a precondition for the acquisition of citizenship. And we see a couple of things here, and I'll show you a couple of graphs here, right? So on the left hand, we see origin country restrictions. On the right hand, we see destination country restrictions. And as I already mentioned, in order to have dual citizenship, both the origin and the destination rules need to be liberal. Well, what we see when we combine these origin and destination rules is that actually, even though dual citizenship has become increasingly more prevalent, we see that still only 39% of all dyats in our data set allows for dual citizenship. Right? So the majority of dyats, in the majority of dyats, dual citizenship is still restricted. And that also makes sense because dyadic dual citizenship is more demanding because both origin and destination need to be in sync. When you look at on the left-hand side, on the origin country perspective, you see that actually up to 70%, when we look at the origin country rules in the dyats, 70% of all the dyats is liberal from an origin country perspective. Right? So dual citizenship acceptance around the world is more strongly driven by origin country acceptance than by destination country acceptance. Right? And this is also something that we see in the literature, where it is mainly the often politically empowered diaspora communities or the economically empowered diaspora communities that push politically towards the origin countries for more liberal rules with regard to holding on to the citizenship of the country where they came from if they want to naturalize abroad, whereas the rules in place with regard to destination country restrictions, they liberalize less strongly. And so that means that there are more dyats where immigrants are expected to give up their citizenship rather than where citizens lose their citizenship because of the origin country perspective. So I'm going, of course, a bit quick through the paper, but I invite you to read the paper afterwards, and then you will see all the details. So this is to give you a snapshot of the data. Well, now that we have constructed these dyadic regulations between states, we can also link the citizenship data with other kinds of data. So in this paper, we link our data with three different kinds of data. In this plot that you see here, we link to UN data on migrant populations. Now, of course, how you measure a migrant is, of course, controversial. But here we use the UN data, which, of course, is delivered by countries to the central level data collection, which captures about 250 million migrants around the world in 2020. Increasing from the about 100 million migrants measured in the 1990s. Right? So these are, of course, people who are registered as migrant with the authorities in the countries where they reside. Now, what we see not in this plot is not only that, of course, the number of migrants globally increased, but we also see that the share of migrants that can potentially naturalize and hold on to the citizenship of the origin country increases from 26% of the migrant population to 38% in 2005 to 46%. So almost half of the migrants across all these dyats can naturalize and hold on to dual citizenship, right? So I'm formulating it like this because, of course, we do not measure directly whether migrants have dual citizenship, but these are the number of migrants that reflect the dyadic regulations measured in our data set. We then also link our data to data from VDEM, so the Varieties of Democracy project. which captures the political regime variation over time. And here we link this to data from our Dyadic data set from 1 year, in 2022, where we know, of course, for each dyad what the political regime is of the origin country and what the political regime of the destination country is. Now, why are we interested in this? Well, because we would expect that, I already mentioned, why is dual citizenship seen as problematic? Traditionally, this was seen as problematic, for example, from the perspective of conflicts between states. And what we know from the democratic peace literature is that conflicts are less likely, especially armed conflicts are less likely between democracies compared to non-democracies. Right? And so if there would be many migrants from authoritarian regimes residing in a democratic regime, this might also potentially seen as problematic because these or the governments of these authoritarian regimes might might have an possible illiberal effect on migrants' behavior in the destination countries. In Europe, we see this, for example, with regard to the Turkey-Germany dyad, where the government of Turkey exercises or tries to exercise influence on the Turkish diaspora, and authorities and political communities in Germany may be specifically concerned about behavior of this particular migrant group, given that they have a strong link with an origin country that reflects authoritarian tendencies. Dual citizenship should be more easy to be accepted between democracies compared to not. And that's also what we see when you look at the bottom left corner. Only 26% of the closed autocracy combinations accept dual citizenship, whereas the liberal democracy combinations, 51% of the dyads accepts dual citizenship. In the paper, we just include this as an illustration of what you can do with the data. We don't include a systematic analysis of the association and perhaps the causal relation between political regime characteristics of the dyad and citizenship policy and other potential elements. Right? So this is something that is to be studied further. You also see that these trends, autocracy, democracy, democracy, that the trend of dual citizenship acceptance is most strong with regard to democracy dyads. Okay, a couple of minutes and I will wrap up, Daniela. So the last thing that we do in the paper is then link our data to naturalization data, or rather citizenship acquisition rates. And here we use data from Eurostat, so the statistical agency of the European Union. And that's, of course, the most direct relation with dual citizenship policy, right? Because the most direct effect of dual citizenship restrictions would be on citizenship acquisition rates, right? If dual citizenship is accepted, people will be more prone to acquire the citizenship of the country where they reside. Whereas if the dual citizenship is restricted, then people may be demotivated to naturalize. This doesn't mean that people don't naturalize if they cannot have dual citizenship, right? And we know from the literature that this is related especially to the citizenship of the destination country, or the economic development level of the destination country, and also the economic or political characteristics of the origin country. Right? So people who come from highly developed countries, for them dual citizenship is seen as more relevant because they have a lower motivation to naturalize, and will only do this if they can hold on to the citizenship of the country where they came from. Whereas for people from less developed countries, or from political unstable countries or refugees, they are more likely to naturalize irrespective of the dual citizenship rules in more economically developed countries. So we use Eurostat data, which covers data in 30 European countries from 186 origin countries for about a 20-year period. This covers about 40,000 observations. These data are not perfect in the sense that they are data that are delivered by the authorities of the reporting countries to Eurostat on the number of citizenship acquisitions by resident foreigners in the 30 European countries. But the number of citizenship acquisitions and the number of foreign residents, they are not always perfectly matched, right? And so the Eurostat data does come with ambiguity, and we have to be careful with this. This is something that needs to be taken into account. But we can also, of course, apply this is in our paper, we use this as an example. If you prefer to use individual level survey data or individual level register data, you can do the same thing. Right? So it is presented in the paper as an example. We use a Bayesian zero inflated beta regression. You can read more about that in the paper. But of course, we use a zero inflated beta regression because there are many zeros in the data, combinations of origin countries, destination countries where there are no naturalizations in a particular year. Well, when we apply the naturalization data to our Dyadic dual citizenship acceptance data, we see that indeed the naturalization rate, so the number of people out of 100 who naturalized, the number of foreign residents who naturalize in a destination country is higher in Dyads where dual citizenship is unrestricted compared to where dual citizenship is restricted. When we look at this after doing the Bayesian model, we see that indeed the predicted naturalization rate is almost 5% in these liberal dual citizenship Dyads compared to 3% in Dyads where this is restricted. We see that so the marginal effect of dyadic dual citizenship is about 1.5 percentage points. Is this much or not? This depends how you look at it. As I already mentioned, dual citizenship is, of course, one of the considerations that people have when they want to naturalize. This is also affected by where people are coming from, where they go, how long they have resided in a country, whether they are married with a citizen or whether they have children. So there are all kinds of variables that can be taken into account, and dual citizenship is one of the elements that people take into account. And with our dyadic data, we can take this into account more carefully. And we also see that the effect of dual citizenship is stronger for people that come from high-income countries. Right? It is stronger and also a bit less precisely estimated because people from high-income countries tend to naturalize less often in developed destination countries. And we see the same depending on what kind of measure of dyadic dual citizenship, the consistent or the inconsistent measure. So wrapping up, I went through this relatively quickly. Read the paper. If you want to play with the data, they are there for you to use. As you can read in the paper, they are free to use for non-commercial use by the general public. You will find a link in the paper to the Dataverse, where you can find a lot of not only the original dyadic data set, but you can also find the scripts, the analysis scripts that we use to produce the dyadic data on the basis of the monadic data, the script that we use to visualize the data as we present in the paper, the analysis script that we use to analyze the naturalization rates. I think everything that you need to replicate what we do. And then if you're interested to link this to other variables, the data are there for you to use. So summing up, yeah, it is obvious that when we talk about dual citizenship, we should look at this from a dyadic perspective. This has surprisingly not yet done, and we present the first of its kind fully dyadic global and longitudinal measure. We do find a strong global trend towards liberalization, but it's certainly not complete, and there is more origin country acceptance than destination country acceptance. We can link this to migrant population data, to regime data, and also to naturalization rate data. We will be able to update the data set when we have new global SID monadic data, which we expect to have in June. You can link this to political rights. I already mentioned a project within global SID on migrant electoral rights, where colleagues are also already working on including these dyadic dual citizenship data and linking that with electoral rights for non-resident citizens and resident non-citizens. And of course, there's more work to be done to understand the political context of this. For example, in a project that we at Global SID are currently doing with Sarah Goodman, and that is funded by the National Science Foundation. So thanks for your attention. For more information on citizenship around the world, you can visit globalcid.eu, and I look forward to the Q&A that we will have in a moment. Thank you.